Hey guys, I'm here with Pranav Piyush. He is the CEO of a new startup called Paramark. He's going to tell you all about that. We used to work together at Invoice to Go and then Bill.com, and we've both been on quite a journey since then. And Pranav has become an expert in measurement, which is the number one thing I get questions about and the number one thing I have questions about. And so I am so excited to have him on the podcast and talk about all things marketing measurement. So, thank you for joining me, Pranav. Welcome to the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Yes. No, I'm super excited to be here. And I think talking about this topic with brand marketers and brand leaders is essential. You know my views on brand, I think, maybe. But I think it's one of the only things in marketing that compounds. So I'm super excited about, talking about this topic.
So, when we were at Invoice to Go, I know that you're a huge brand fan. And I know that because I was helping run your brand marketing department, and you let us do all kinds of crazy experiments, and it changed the way people saw the brand and the company. And I've watched you kind of help build Bill.com since then. And could you tell me a little bit about the journey, what you learned, how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, Invoice to Go was my first sort of VP level role in marketing, and I had done things like growth, which it's a funny word. It's somewhere between product and marketing, but I had never really owned the marketing budget. So when I started to do that sort of officially and formally, um, I didn't know much about brand. I was learning. And, of course, like we all as human beings know a little bit about marketing and brand and what that means, but doing it is a very different thing. And one of the things that, was exciting to me was the surface that we had with Invoice to Go lent itself really well to building a brand story and something unique. And you all did some really incredible stuff with the podcast, with so taking big, bold steps even back then. And so for me, the journey was learning what it means to build a brand. What does that even mean? What is brand? And we all get confused about building a brand and brand marketing. And those are very different things. And I've learned over the course of what we did at Invoice to Go.
Work looks different now, and so do we. Say hello to an all-new Invoice to Go.
And what we did at Bill, I was part of the team that helped to kind of relaunch the brand at Bill, working with a very talented set of brand marketers and obviously our CMO there. And what I would say is, and kind of how I led off, that is the only thing that compounds. What I mean by this is if you are able to build strong mental associations between your brand and the key jobs to be done in your category with your audience, then those mental associations is what's going to get people to come back again and again. And that's what matters. Your, shorter term tactics are exactly that. They're shorter term, which means you pay for it once and then disappears. It doesn't come back next month, next quarter. But your brand stuff will always come back because it's longer term. And I think that's where most marketers struggle, is how do you balance both? How do you invest both in short-term results, but also that longer-term brand building?
Yeah. I think that's so smart, and I think that, for me personally, I'm just gonna, put my own feelings in here because maybe we could turn this into a mini
Yeah.
therapy session. Brand marketers, it's like we use our intuition so much, and we spend all this time building up our intuition so that we can connect with people and understand how to change their hearts and minds. And then you go to justify what you want to do, what you want to spend money on, and the ROI of that to the business, right? And that's where I think a lot of frustration happens. And I think you saw
Hmm.
that frustration a little bit, and you're part of it, right? Because we were doing all kinds of
Absolutely.
experiments and things at Invoice to Go. And we were like, okay, we know that we need to become an app that is more open, that is more attracts different types of users and that kind of thing and different demographics. And the only way to do that is to change hearts and minds. But then saying, okay, we need X amount of dollars for a podcast, X amount of dollars for this. How do you think about justifying that spend and then measuring those results?
It's incredibly hard. So that's the first thing that I will say. The way that I think about this is marrying your intuition with data. And what I mean by this is, and I know you're using the word intuition a little bit more broadly, but your intuition gets formed, your gut gets formed by your conversations with real human beings who are, your prospects or your audience or whatever label you want to put on that. And so if you're talking to your customers all the time and you truly understand their needs, their aspirations, their problems, then that's what's leading you to form an intuition about, hey, this, piece of marketing or even like this feature or product can probably solve that, need or that aspiration. So that's step number one. Intuition is also sort of formed by data, and whether that's qualitative, quantitative research. And I think that that's one of the other things that's missing a lot in marketing teams is really being close to your customers. Then there's a question of, okay, how do you justify the spend? And what I've come to realize is that everything in marketing is basically an experiment. And if you think about it from that lens, if you think about it from an experimentation lens, you're not really trying to justify a budget. You're trying to place a bet. And if the bet pays off, here's the expected outcome. And if the bet doesn't pay off, you learn something and you go to the next bet. And if you adopt that frame of mind, then you move away from this idea of I have to defend my spend, I have to justify my investment. No, it's an experiment. And now we can get into something that's a little bit more tangible. And, I used to say this all the time, like, let's find all the different creative ideas that we want to experiment with, and let's figure out a way to get those experiments out there, get the data, and then we make the decisions, right? So how you form your experiment hypothesis could be your gut, it could be your intuition, it could be qualitative research, it could be quantitative data. It allows for a lot of freedom and flexibility.
And okay, so I'm gonna tackle some big hairy questions given what you've said.
Yeah.
One thing that I've seen is bullshitty data.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about? Where it's okay. We need to justify the spend. We need to justify our results. We need to paint our marketing team in the best light because there is so many eyes on marketing and so much criticism
Yeah.
around marketing and marketing spend that some marketers, I've seen them skew the numbers. Oh, we've got and kind of like massage that data to the point where they just look really good,
Mhm.
so how
Yeah, it's a
how
great
do
question.
you
Your 2.5 million followers that are so loyal to you, maybe they're bots.
how do you take the bullshit out of data? How do we do that?
It's a great point. And I think I use the word data theater or theatrics.
Probably better than
uh,
bullshitty data.
Hey, the point is exactly what you said, which is it is, and I don't think that marketers necessarily do this like knowingly, but if they do, that's obviously not a great thing. But a lot of what's happened in the last 2 decades is people have gotten infatuated with these very bottom of the funnel type of metrics. And those are basically like, how
Yeah.
many people clicked on this thing? How many people, took a very specific digital action? And that, in my opinion, is bullshit data. And
Yeah.
I don't make any qualms about it. And frankly, I didn't even fully realize this until we started working on Paramark, is a lot of the data is just garbage. It's garbage in, garbage out. And what I would say is every marketing leader at a VP level, at a CMO level, at a director level, have to really be able to understand what is good data and what is bad data and make those calls. And so, if a marketer is listening to this, if you're working in a team where the senior leadership does not have the data fluency to be able to tell apart what is valid, what is invalid in the data that you have, you probably want to go find a different job. And the reason
Yeah.
I say this is it all starts with the senior leadership's ability to really understand what's happening with their marketing motion. And if they don't understand it, and if they can't have a mature conversation about what data is valid versus not, you're just going to have a very uphill battle trying to convince them to do marketing the right way.
I'm gonna pick that apart for a second, because I've worked with a lot of
Mm-hmm.
startups, right? I've done a lot of brand marketing and built a lot of brands for startups. And especially at early stage startups, you might have a founder that doesn't have a lot of business experience. In fact, a lot of times this is their first startup. So
Yep.
is there anything that you can do? That data fluency doesn't exist, that foundational knowledge doesn't exist. How do you, if you were consulting for someone, working with someone, how do you get them on the path? And by them, I mean business leaders, of understanding what is good data, what should we care about, like, rather than
Yeah.
saying, oh, we just want to go viral. And I'm like, well, guys, going viral isn't going to, increase our revenue. It's, it's
Yes.
much more
Yes.
complicated than that. Yeah.
I think it's a very good question, right? So if you're working with an earlier stage company that maybe is very, the leadership is very engineering and product minded and maybe doesn't understand sort of marketing data, you've got to be able to speak their language. And the way that I think about this is breaking down your entire go-to-market motion into literally a diagram. I kid you not, right? You must have seen this on one of the webinars that I did, is you map out your entire go-to-market motion. Here are all the marketing inputs or sales inputs. Here are the key leading indicators of eventual revenue, right? So whether that's a trial start or a sign up or, book a demo or whatever that might be, to bottom of the funnel, metrics closer to like pipeline gen if it's a B2B SaaS, or it's like literally, a recurring customer or a repeat order if you're e-commerce or consumer, and ultimately revenue. When you map out your entire go-to-market motion in a clear way, in a clear diagram, you're actually inviting your business leaders to engage with you in a way that they truly understand. Because they think about that right? Engineers, technical people think about that in like a process and a system. And so you're breaking down the entire go-to-market motion in a process diagram and a system diagram for them. And you then start to piece apart, okay, does it really matter that we go viral if your demos booked doesn't increase? Show me the money! Probably not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can then have those very common sense conversations about what is the true metric that is a leading indicator of eventual success, and how do you move that metric? And you did all of these things in marketing, but that metric didn't move. So, you probably have to revisit whether it's worth doing those things. And that's what we do. We don't have any trackers, pixels, UTM codes. I famously, I don't know if I'm famous, but I killed all of that on the Paramark website because we're like, it doesn't matter. What matters is the number of people who are self-serve subscribing to our blog and self-serve booking a demo on our website. And as long as those numbers are going up, I'm a happy clown. If those numbers are not going up, then whatever I'm doing in marketing is not really working. And so really simplifying things down to what is the key leading indicator for marketing, and is it going up and to the right as you invest more in marketing?
One of the things that this really kind of brings to mind for me is that what you're doing is not only examining like a soft benefit of your approach, is that you're creating more cohesion within the marketing team, because you're thinking of it as an ecosystem working together rather than an adversarial relationship where it's
Exactly.
like, oh, should we spend more money on brand? Does brand get the dollars? Does growth get the dollar? Which is like completely silly, because growth is caused by a lot of things, not just, what growth marketing
Exactly.
is. Yeah.
Yep.
But can you unpack that a little bit? Like, what are your feelings and thoughts, and what's your perspective on the siloing within marketing and how we should think about it differently?
Oh my God, it drives me nuts, Nat. So, you know, we've all struggled with these titles, right? Growth marketing, performance marketing, brand marketing, content marketing, partner marketing, product marketing. We love to create these specialized roles. And I would argue that if and when Paramark has a big marketing team, we are not going to have these silly titles.
Corporate and conventional job titles have lost their meaning in today's modern workplaces.
Yeah.
And we have to think holistically about what is the goal of the marketing team that you are forming. And I would argue that really you need three types of skill set on any marketing team. You need creativity, you need data fluency, and then you need platform fluency. And when you have those three things together, that forms a complete marketing team. So what do I mean by this, right? Creativity, I think everyone understands this is like the source of everything in marketing. If you don't have creative people on your team, you probably don't call yourself marketing. Data fluency is being able to understand and draw the correlations between your marketing activities and your business outcomes. And platform fluency is, you know, every type of marketing. If you're doing social media, if you're doing paid search, if you're doing out of home, if you're doing podcasting, there are specific skill sets to each channel or each type of thing that you're doing. And so when you combine the platform fluency, data fluency, and creativity, that is a team in my sort of perspective. So is that a brand marketing team? Is that a performance marketing team? I don't think of those as separate. You need to have both the creativity and the data fluency on the same team to have results. So that's, I don't know if I answer your question specifically, but I think the whole marketing industry has just done a massive disservice to the field of marketing by creating these silos, and there's no need for these silos to exist.
Yeah, and well, I mean, one of the things that I found when I was leading, small teams at like a Series B is the other thing that it does is it really makes people unhappy to be put in a box like that, and I felt it myself when I was a brand marketer because it's like, oh, she's the creative girl, and it's like, no, actually, I want to learn other things. And when I did get into the data and I was like, oh, this is kind of like a game. This is actually really fun. And I like seeing the impact of what I'm doing. And so I think that, I felt siloed myself. And I think to create a happy marketing team, right? Because the most productive teams are happy teams.
Yes.
It really makes a lot of sense what you're saying, to think of people as primarily creatives that can branch out into these other areas and seeing like, okay, how can we create these things with the people that we're hiring? And you're hiring the whole person as well, not just a role. You're hiring a person.
That's right.
So I want to shift a little bit. This is a brand podcast. So let's talk a little bit about the impact. I want to hear your perspective on brand in B2B versus brand in B2C. What, when you think about measuring the ROI on these things, the impact, justifying investment, do you approach B2B or B2C any differently, or what are your thoughts on that?
There's some nuances, but to be honest, the fundamentals of brand and marketing are the same across B2C and B2B. And we see this in our customer base as well. We've got some, really big B2B brands who are sort of working with us and in the early stages of, pilots and customers, and some recurring customers. And then we've got some really large B2C brands, and the conversations are the same. We all think we're unique snowflakes because, we do fintech, or we do B2B, or, we do, food delivery. But in reality, it's all the same. And it just comes back to this very simple thing. When I think of a job to be done, right, if I'm like hungry and 8 a.m., what is the first name that comes to my mind to solve that pain point? Is it picking up a Snickers bar? Is it going to the Starbucks drive-through? Is it getting Dunkin' Donuts? And that's on the consumer side. On the business side, is the exact same thing. If I am looking for a CRM, what is the first name that comes to mind? Is it Salesforce? Is it HubSpot? Is it Pipedrive? And the difference is not there in my perspective. I think it's significantly harder on the B2B side for one reason, which is your buying cycles are much longer and you don't make those decisions every month. You make them maybe once in 3 years, right? You don't change your CRM every year. You don't change it every month. You change it once in 3 years. So the opportunity for a brand to build that mental association, like you're hoping that you make the investment now, and 2 years from now, when your audience is thinking about the next time they buy a CRM, that you are, number one in their mind. That's a really hard pill to swallow for smaller B2B brands. B2C, they understand this, and because it's a much more high frequency decision for your audience, when you invest in brand marketing or improving your brand, you do see impact in a shorter time frame. So there's some nuance there in B2C, B2B, mostly because of the sales cycle. But at the end of the day, it's the same concept of, are you top of mind for your audience for the specific jobs that you solve for them?
And then I think there's, like, are you top of mind? And then also, can they get the information that they need? There's so many like layers to turning someone from an
Oh, totally.
interested party
Yep.
into a customer. How do you then measure, yes, we want to be top of mind. So we've created an amazing brand. So we've covered the brand side. And then how do we measure our efficacy in, going from that top of mind? Like, there are a lot of brands out there that I think are cool that I've never purchased anything from,
Yeah. No, that comes down to the question of the jobs to be done, right? And Nat, you and I are exceptions because we are marketers and specifically we study brand. So
Mhm.
we're going to know about a lot of brands, but you can't look at your own experience as representative of what happens to a non-marketer or an average sort of consumer of both
Mhm.
consumer or business products. They're not like you and me, and they're thinking about all these cool brands because they're not studying them. So it all comes down to, in my opinion, one thing, which is your market share growing?
Mhm.
So let me explain what I mean by that. You are either winning new customers or you're defending from your competitors stealing your customers. Those are the only two ways in which you grow market share. And if you are growing a brand, hopefully you're keeping your market share flat or increasing, and your overall sort of market share is growing. And that's the only way to really measure whether you have a sustainable, long-lasting brand. A lot of the studies around brand health surveys and brand trackers, I am not sure that they actually work. And there's a
Mm.
really good book by Jenny from the Ernberg Bass Institute. I'm going to mispronounce her last name, Romanik, I think. It's called, brand health metrics or something of that nature. She has taken a very sort of, analytical approach at how do you construct these brand health surveys. But she herself says that, they can be somewhat helpful, but at the end of the day, if you're not driving more sales, what's the point of having a brand? To your earlier point, right? I know about all of these brands, but I don't actually use them. Like, that's pointless then, right? So I don't know. That was a little bit of a rambly answer, but I would say for your category, are you consistently getting more share of the market? And that's something that you measure on a quarterly, on a yearly basis. And if you are, then that's great. Then you know that you're developing a valuable brand. If your market share ain't growing, at least make sure it's flat and it's not declining. If it's declining, obviously, whatever you're doing with your brand is not working.
Yeah. Yeah. The interesting thing, for okay, I've got a question and then I've got an anecdote and I want to see what you would have
Yeah.
done in this situation. So, so the next level of this, I work with a lot of companies that are, for lack of a better term, whale hunters, right? So like they're
Mm-hmm.
B2B companies that are going after massive contracts, sometimes federal, sometimes this, sometimes that. So, but these are, 500K and up contracts.
Hmm.
And they have a longer sales cycle.
Yep.
So this starts to blend, go to market together as a whole, rather than thinking about marketing and sales as separate entities, which oftentimes happens. You're trying to measure your impact on certain accounts or relationships in a very specific way. So, how do you think about blending marketing metrics with very specific relationship building or account based metrics?
Yeah, I don't think it's that difficult, right? So if you are a mid-market or enterprise-focused B2B organization, right? So you've got, I'm just making this up, 1,000 target accounts, ideal accounts, or 5,000 ideal accounts, and you want to break into them, then what you really want to be looking at is when your sales team is doing outreach into those accounts, um, how many of those accounts have already heard of you?
Mhm.
That's a very simple thing to track if you have a tight relationship between marketing and sales. And in a high functioning, high performing sales and marketing team, you'll notice the salespeople give feedback to the marketing team, going like, "Hey, I had this great conversation with a prospect. They had already heard about us because of this video that you all had produced. Great work. Just want to kind of pass on that feedback, right?" So having that feedback loop is critical. And to your point, if you're more targeted in your outreach, that's actually really cool, right? And I'll give you an example. Like with tools like LinkedIn and some of the other account-based marketing tools, you can actually get very specific in your targeting. So even you as a marketing team can make sure that you have a high frequency and reach within your target account list. And some teams do this really well. So I heard this story where one of the B2B teams had literally mapped out the physical addresses of all the offices in their thousand company target account list and bought billboards right at those office locations. Now
Smart.
that's right. Like, why wouldn't you do that? That's such a no-brainer now that I think about it, that every B2B organization should be thinking like that, is leverage the data that you have on that target account list and do whatever you can with direct mail, with out of home, with local TV buys, with local radio buys, and obviously all the digital stuff that you can do with all the fancy targeting we have, access to. So I don't think that there is it just takes a little bit of creativity in designing the right motion, but I would argue it's even easier because you know exactly where those 1,000 accounts are.
hmm And so when it comes to measurement, I'm going to tell you a somewhat embarrassing story because I'm sure there's a better way to do it that exists, but this is how I did it. Um,
Sure.
in a situation where we had very specific high value targets, I'm talking like big federal contracts, etc. I actually
Yep.
once created a Google spreadsheet and put all of these people's
Mhm.
names on the Google spreadsheet. So there was like, 25 names, but they were, the decision makers and inner
Yep.
circle. And I tallied up every single time they interacted with our brand on social media. I tallied up, I
Yeah.
copied all the comments in there every time they opened a thought leadership email and read. But I did this by
Yep.
hand
Yep.
because I didn't know of any better way to do it at that time. And
Yep.
I'm sure there's a much easier way to do it. So, for the whale hunters, just because I work with a lot of them, how do you recommend, keeping track of those relationships and kind of physically representing it and collaborating between the sales and marketing teams?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I don't think that that's embarrassing at all. Google Sheets or any spreadsheet is awesome. At the early stages, that's what you should be doing. You don't need any fancy software to do a lot of what you just talked about. And it actually becomes a lot easier because you're not relying on bad software that's going to miss out a whole bunch of data in that you had to manually look at, did that person's social profile like our post, and they might have used a completely different email to open the email, but from the names they can make that connection, right? So in the early days, spreadsheets are great. That's what I would do. That's what we do today. We don't use any fancy software to do our own marketing measurement.
I felt kind of silly.
Yeah, I don't think that's I think that is absolutely the right way to go when you're early stage. When you go from 25 accounts to now 2,500 accounts, obviously that's not feasible, right? Like, how are you going to do that at that scale? And so you do need some software in place to help you potentially. At a larger scale, I personally wouldn't even think about doing this type of tracking. What I would do is something different, which is aggregate engagement on the different channels that you have. And what that means is, are you seeing more engagement from your organic social? So impressions, likes, comments, reshares, reposts, whatever they're called. Are you seeing more click-throughs from your emails? Are you seeing more opens in your emails? Open rates are a little bit funky these days, so I don't trust that metric. But I would look at more aggregate stats as you scale up, because trying to tie everything down to an individual's identity is getting harder and harder with all the privacy changes that are happening. So, but at a smaller scale, that absolutely works. And then that your stuff is working, right? When your stuff is working, you keep doubling down and increasing the velocity and the investment there. But in the early stages, spreadsheets are great.
Well, I feel a little bit better now. Thank you for that. Thank you for that therapy, if nothing else. But yeah, great advice there. Okay, so let's see here. Just a couple of questions to wrap up. You've given us so much to think about. I want to know personally, what's the most exciting campaign or initiative you've run to date? Or, can you talk about the brand and the results and how you measured it and what you do differently? Or, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'll we're 1 year in, or slightly over 1 year in this journey with Paramark, and so I'm still trying to figure out how our marketing motion is going to work. So it's very much work in progress. The one thing that I would say has worked really well for us is we were very conscious from the early days of bringing on advisors onto our advisory board, our cap table, both as investors and advisors. And these are people who are known quantities in the field. So we've got CMOs from companies like Gong and Figma and Zapier and PagerDuty and Salesforce, who are listed on our team page as advisors. And a couple of them wrote about us to their audience, and that was a massive amount of inbound as a result of that. And also, it led to a point where when we go into a sales conversation, people have already heard of us, even though we're 13 months, 14 months in. And that's hard to achieve, but being strategic with finding the right people to be on your advisory board, or some people will call this like influencer strategy. I don't really think of it that way. We were just we wanted those people to advise us truly, but their reach also helped us to get recognition in the category. So that's worked really well for us. I think early stages, that strategy can work, is surrounding yourself with the best people in the field. And obviously that's an advantage. The other thing I would say is digital events have been working really well for us. So the webinar that we did with Exit 5, we're going to do another one with marketing ops, and these are pockets of prospects or customers that for whom this topic is super relevant, and we do not do a sales pitch on those webinars. I don't even talk about Paramark. I just talk about how would you measure marketing if you're a $10 million marketing budget company. And we just lay it all out as if you could do this in-house. And then it leads to really interesting conversations. I don't send a single email to anybody who attended those events. I don't pretend that you're a lead. If you're interested, if you found that topic interesting, you'll reach out to me on LinkedIn or through our website, and we'll have a conversation. And that has worked really well. It's gotten us a couple of really good deals. And I'm excited about doing more of that in the future.
The interesting thing that you've given a piece of advice, I think, without ever actually overtly giving the advice, and it's two things. Nothing replaces that human touch, and like two examples.
Yeah.
One is having other people just talk about you personally, an individual.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and the other
Yep.
thing is like customized touches, like figuring out the addresses of your top leads and putting a billboard right by their office. That is like, I am really focused on you. I am really focused on attracting you. You know, um, One of the things I recommended once was like, hey, just drop by their office and introduce yourself, shake their hand, and drop off some swag. And it's so
Yep.
funny like how people it like blew their mind. I'm like that.
I
that
know. Yeah.
I got my first job in New York because the internet like I the reason that I got my first job is because I printed out like 50 copies of my resume, mapped New York out because there was no iPhone. So I had like a physical map and like had like pins, basically. And
Yep.
then
Yep.
like
Yep.
introduced
Yep.
myself and shook hands. And that's how I got my first job. And the interesting thing is like we've gone so far from that we don't realize that people still matter the most, like nothing
Absolutely.
replaces
Every
that.
every chance that I get to convert a customer meeting into an actual physical real life meeting, I will always
Yeah,
take that opportunity if that's available. 100%.
right. Nothing replaces thinking about other people more than you think about yourself, you know? Um, okay,
Exactly.
so two little questions to wrap up. Is there anything that you want to say about where you think brand is going or where brand marketing is going specifically, or how you think that this part of marketing is going to evolve in the future?
The more the more I've studied marketing over the last few years, the more I'm convinced that I think the distinction between brand marketing and performance marketing isn't really there. Brand performs, brand marketing performs, and performance marketing builds your brand. And so the first thing that I say to every marketer is like, don't think about it as like this is brand marketing and this is performance marketing. I think that's a recipe for failure. So that's one. Second is I think about creativity as the core driver for the next decade. And it has already been the case. So this is like a stupid statement, but all I'm saying is like figure out how you're going to fuel creativity for your business. And that to me is going to be critical. And all this AI hype, oh my God, like it's
Yeah.
just my take is the best marketers are still relying on what's in here to come up with the creative ideas. And AI can be an assistant to that, but it's not going to be the driving force. So anybody who's like jumping on the AI hype train with the idea that it's somehow going to replace marketing and creativity is completely deluded. Now, I don't mean that don't learn new technology. Learn new technology, but human creativity and ingenuity is something that I will bet on decade after decade, regardless of how far AI comes.
I love hearing you say that. The funny thing is as a creative marketer, tons of people ask me that, like, aren't you worried that, all the creative marketers will just get replaced by AI? And I'm like, think about the function of AI. It aggregates the most common answer and then gives you what
Mm-hmm.
everybody else is saying. The job of a marketer is to figure out how to zig where others zag. And that's something that, you can't do by gathering the most
Exactly.
common responses. It actually does the opposite of
That's
that.
precisely it.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
So I
Right
am
there.
like a
There's
huge Ezra Klein
you
fan. So, and I think that the best thing that he does is ask 3 books, movies, or series, or whatever it is that you'd recommend to the audience that, can have to do with anything. So I want to end there. But if you had something else to say about the creative, I'd love to add it to the last question.
Sure. I was just gonna. Yeah, I recently read this book called Alchemy, by Rory Sutherland. I think he's one of the Ogilvy senior people in the UK. And, he just talks about how you gotta try all of the stupid ideas that you think are stupid, or, you gotta try a whole bunch of like crazy ideas that everyone's gonna tell you is gonna fail. And very often, the non-rational ideas are the ones that end up succeeding. And there's a reason for it, because humans aren't rational and not just a summation of everything that they've read online. And so, that just goes back to the point of creativity. So the question about books, the one that is really top of mind for me right now is the three body problem, mostly because I read the first book maybe about a year or two ago, and then they just released a Netflix show, and I thought it was really well done. So I really like when I read a book and then they change it into adapt it to a different format. So it's been that one's top of mind. I enjoyed that show and the book. Another one that's very sci-fi driven answer here. Dune. I haven't watched the movie, but I'm waiting for the opportunity to watch the movie. Same thing. I've read all the books and I'm excited about the movie. Let's see, what else have I read? There's a book that's lying on right behind me. Actually, wait, it's called The Creative Act. This is by Rick Rubin. So I'm going to put this on the video here. I haven't read it yet, but Rick Rubin is like a famous producer, and I had no clue who he was. So I saw this book at the airport, and his basic thesis for this book is like everybody can be creative, and how you sort of unleash creativity. So yeah, I'm excited about this one. So yeah, those are 3 recommendations.
Amazing. Well, Pranav, thank you so much. It's always fun to talk to you. Always fun to catch up. But I am so impressed with what you're doing. I think, obviously this is the question. This is like the burning question always. How do we measure success? How do we measure success? How do we stand out and measure success? So, I think this is going to be really interesting to a lot of people. So thank you so much. And yeah, I can't wait for the next time that we chat.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was a blast, and I learned some new stuff. So thank you for doing this. I'm excited to listen to other episodes.